South Carolina, where voters are going to the polls for the first official Democratic presidential primary of 2024. Those polls will close in just under 15 minutes, and President Biden is all but assured to win. The big questions are now about turnout and the president's margin of victory over his two challengers, Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips and author Marianne Williamson. Here's what some voters had to say earlier today.
There is some concern about enthusiasm among Democrats come November. Do you think enough Democrats are excited to vote for Joe Biden?
Probably not. I mean, clearly there are very few people here today, and I think that's an indication. Yeah. I hope it'll change between now and November.
I don't see why people support him. I don't see no reason why people support Donald Trump.
He's probably going to be indicted before he's president.
He's a liar. He's a cheater.
Okay, then. Joining me now is NBC's Nnamdi Igwanwu. He is at a watch party in Columbia, South Carolina. Nnamdi, thank you very much for being here. When can we expect to see the results of South Carolina's primary?
Well, if 2020 is any indication, the minute polls close, we should have a pretty clear idea of exactly who won. Honestly, now people widely assume that President Joe Biden is going to have a sizable margin of victory over his two challengers, Marianne Williamson and Dean Phillips. And most votes, at least the lion's share, should be counted by midnight tonight. But just like you mentioned, the real question here isn't about who's going to emerge victorious. It's more so about just how many people are going to vote. Some Democrats are looking at South Carolina to gauge enthusiasm among a base that some have suspected are softening on President Biden. But Democratic officials here are optimistic they can have at least a good enough showing to suggest that, one, Democrats are tuned into this race, and two, that they're still supportive of President Biden.
You know, reports also show that some voters found that their polling locations had been moved or closed without their knowledge. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I spoke to one election director in Orangeburg, and she told me she heard complaints in Charleston and the Low Country of voters who went to their precincts ready to cast their ballot only to find out it was closed. At issue here seems to be a state law that was implemented in 2022 that required county officials to implement cost-cutting measures for the presidential primary election. So as a result, what I was told is we went from having 150 polling precincts in South Carolina for the general election to just 50. Part of that law also required counties to make sure that they are providing adequate notice to voters. I guess it's up for debate whether or not voters were provided that notice. You had DNC Chair Jamie Harrison himself this morning go to his polling precinct only to find out that it also had been closed. So I was told that all of those voters, they were able to be directed to a different precinct, but there definitely was confusion to start off the day of voting care.
All right, Nnamdi Igwanwu, thank you very much for that report. Joining us now is national political correspondent Steve Kornacki. He's digging into the data and ready to break down the results once polls close at the top of the hour. Steve, we know who's likely to win. So what are you watching for tonight?
Yeah, I mean, look, you get at it right there. It's a question of what's the turnout going to be? How do you interpret that? What's the margin going to be for Joe Biden? Obviously, when you look at South Carolina, this has been a priority for Joe Biden since 2020, is changing the Democratic calendar, making South Carolina the first state. Remember, he wasn't actually on the ballot in New Hampshire. The DNC, at his behest, said, hey, New Hampshire can have that early primary, but they're not getting delegates from it. So this is the first sort of official Democratic contest, the first time Biden's name is going to be on the ballot against these challengers. So we'll see a test there. But we already saw in New Hampshire, just as a write-in candidate, how well he did. And the reason he wanted South Carolina to go first, of course, is this is the state that rescued him in 2020. Remember, Biden did get crushed in Iowa, crushed in New Hampshire, didn't do well in Nevada, looked like his campaign was out of gas, came to South Carolina and won more than 2-1 over Bernie Sanders. And the key to it for Joe Biden 4 years ago was the black vote. You can see here he got 61% of it in South Carolina 4 years ago. And this has been, the majority of the Democratic electorate African-American. This has been the modern story of the South Carolina Democratic primary. If you can win the black vote, you can win this state and win it big. Hillary Clinton, 86% of the black vote in 2016 over Bernie Sanders, won the state in a landslide. Barack Obama, 2008, nearly 80% of the black vote. Remember, Obama had won Iowa. He lost New Hampshire. It was a close race with Clinton. He got a landslide win in South Carolina, and much the way it sort of ignited Joe Biden in 2020, it really ignited Obama in 2016. 2008. So this, in some ways, is a test of the enthusiasm of what Joe Biden has seen since 2020 as his most loyal bloc within the Democratic Party. What kind of turnout is there? Now, in terms of what to compare this to, here's the problem. We got nothing. Here's turnout for all of the South Carolina Democratic primaries, okay? And you see the numbers vary wildly, but the key is this. Take a look at 1996 and take a look at 2012. Those are the 2 years that are like this year. An incumbent Democrat running for re-election. It was Bill Clinton in 96. It was Barack Obama in 2012. Well, both parties in South Carolina have a tradition. When they've got an incumbent running for re-election, they cancel the primary. So we had no primary in 96. We had none in 12. We don't have, that's the kind of year you'd want to compare this to in terms of turnout. We don't have that as a basis of comparison. And also in terms of the margin for Biden, I think we could use New Hampshire maybe. You know, how he did in New Hampshire as a write-in candidate. Now that his name's actually on the ballot, he probably wants to do better than that. But what do we compare it to? We've had one incumbent president of either party who's ever faced a primary in South Carolina. It was a Republican. It was 1992. It was George Bush Sr., and George Bush Sr. was challenged by Pat Buchanan, who done exceptionally well in New Hampshire, at least compared to expectations. Bush beat him by 41 points. David Duke was running that year. He got 7%, but that's it. That's the only incumbent president who's ever faced a primary in South Carolina. So not a lot of benchmarks here, but as you say, in less than 10 minutes now, polls are going to close in South Carolina. We're going to see these counties start lighting up. There are some counties here we're paying particular attention to that have majority African-American populations. Those are the ones in particular we're looking for the enthusiasm factor, how many folks are turning out, just how big is the Biden margin. And I think, yeah, we'll get a pretty good sense here within a half an hour, I think, of some of these questions.
Mm-hmm. So Steve, on the turnout question, to your point, the fact that, you know, President Biden is an incumbent running for re-election. Should we read anything into it if the turnout numbers are not big? Could we read into that people realize he's the president, he's already going to win, no need for me to vote? Should we temper how we look at turnout, especially if turnout is low?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to read the turnout question, and one is like you're saying, hey, it's the expectation that this is a foregone conclusion and not a lot of suspense, and therefore the turnout is just low. And again, what exactly constitutes low turnout? It's tough to find a historical benchmark, but right. One way to read it is what you're saying. Another, though, is it a question of enthusiasm? Because we have seen in some polling, there's questions about enthusiasm among some core Democratic constituencies, and that includes black voters. So if the turnout is particularly low in the majority black areas in South Carolina, that might speak to something we've been seeing in the polling. And the other X factor in all this, of course, is in 3 weeks, the South Carolina Republican primary is held, and we know the importance of that to Nikki Haley. We also know for Haley, she's trying to win over Democrats and independents. And here's how it works in South Carolina. There's no such thing as party registration in South Carolina. No one's a registered Democrat. No one's a registered Republican. You're just registered to vote. But the rule, if you decide to participate in today's Democratic primary, you can go ahead and do that no matter who you are, but you cannot vote in the Republican primary on the 24th. So how many Democratic-leaning voters, people who would call themselves Democratic, are going to sit this one out because they want to vote against Trump on the 24th? That's an X factor.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of key counties that you will be looking out for, Steve, I don't know if you have them at the top of your head, but I do know that the county where Columbia is, the state capital of South Carolina, that has a big African-American population, no?
Yeah, basically a lot of the counties in this sort of mid-stretch of the state, right here in Allendale County, this has the largest black population of any county in the state. It is 71% African-American. Richland County, where Columbia is about 50% African-American. Lee County is about 65%, so look for that. Orangeburg County is about 65%, so we'll look there. Williamsburg County is another big one. These are the counties I think we're going to be looking at tonight, and there's there's a whole bunch of them kind of in this region right here. When you get to the upcountry of South Carolina, though, very low black population, especially up near Clemson in the mountains there where Clemson University is. There's a little bit here where Greenville is, Spartanburg, not much in way of a black population in York County, comparatively speaking, Rock Hill, Charlotte metro area, very little in Horry County where Myrtle Beach is. Charleston County, it's about 24% African American. So really it is this area kind of in here, I think, where you have these counties with majority black, large black populations, and I think that's where we look for that turnout question.
And then one other question for you, Steve. I know that in South Carolina, veterans are a big demographic in South Carolina. Should we expect them to be more of a factor in the Republican primary, or could we see them as a factor in the Democratic primary?
Yeah, typically, I think leaning a bit more Republican. And again, I think especially in a year like this when there's so much activity relative to the Democratic primary on the Republican side. And I think that's something that Haley, folks who are really paying attention to this tonight, might be Nikki Haley's campaign. They may be paying, next to the president, they may be paying the most attention to this race tonight because, again, she's trying to dip into independents and Democrats. And every vote that's cast in this primary tonight, the higher that turnout gets, I think if you're the Haley campaign, you're looking at that saying every one of those votes is a missed opportunity to get someone into the Republican primary to vote against Trump.
Steve Kornacki, you have honored me with your presence on my show. Thank you very, very much. We'll see you in just a few moments at the top of the hour when you will join Eamon to dig into the primary results coming in shortly after the polls close. And that will do it for me today. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in tomorrow to the Sunday Show when Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, chair of the House Progressive Caucus, joins me live to discuss the latest U.S. military action in the Middle East, Republicans' efforts to impeach DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, and much more. That's tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern right here on MSNBC. But keep it here. Eamon Mohideen is next.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Eamon Mohideen. It is 7 p.m. here on the East Coast, which means polls in South Carolina's Democratic primary are now officially closed. Tonight's primary contest, marking the first official primary for Democrats and the first time that President Joe Biden's name appeared on a ballot this election season. Now, alongside him on the ballot, Democratic rivals, Congressman Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson. Steve Kornacki is standing by for us from Washington, prepared to break down the results for us any moment now as soon as we get them. However, to be clear, tonight's outcome is all but decided. Biden stands as the overwhelming favorite tonight in the Palmetto State. And what we really want to watch out for here tonight are how many delegates he leaves South Carolina with. A total of 55 are up for grabs, and they will be awarded proportionally based on tonight's outcome. A candidate needs a total of nearly 2,000 delegates to capture the Democratic nomination. Meanwhile, in breaking news overseas tonight, the U.S. and the U.K. launched a new series of strikes targeting the Houthis inside Yemen. The attacks hit at least 36 targets in at least 13 locations in the country, following yesterday's retaliatory strikes by the United States on more than 85 targets at 7 Iranian-backed militant facilities in both Iraq and Syria. A senior Biden administration official told NBC News today that the strikes in Yemen are in response to actions by the Houthis and are not related to yesterday's strikes in Iraq and in Syria. And that's where we start this hour of our breaking news coverage. With us now, live from Tel Aviv, Matt Bradley, NBC News foreign correspondent. Matt, you are in the region. Give us a sense of how this second day of airstrikes by the United States and its coalition have developed across both Yemen and the broader Arab world.
Yeah, well, Eamon, I mean, this is a tricky one, right? Because it's tempting to associate with the salvo of missiles and projectiles that were launched by the U.S. against those targets in Iraq and Syria the night before. But as we heard, as you mentioned from the states, that this is not necessarily associated with that. This is part of an ongoing mission to target Houthi sites in Yemen that have been hitting commercial shipping in the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea. And as you mentioned, we heard from the Houthis just tonight. They said that they were going to be continuing that harassment of international shipping, which has really snarled up a lot of traffic throughout that region, really a main shipping route for the entire world between Asia and Europe, forcing a lot of people to go, or a lot of these boats to go around the Horn of Africa and the Cape of Good Hope. They said that they would continue as long as Israel's aggression in the Gaza Strip continues, a fight that has killed now nearly 27,000 people, most of them civilians, this according to the Gaza Ministry of Health. So this looks totally distinct from what we've been seeing in Iraq and Syria sort of downstream. It is a different approach, a different reason, and a different mission. But when you go upstream to why this is all happening, the genesis of this all comes back right here to Israel and its fight against the Gaza Strip. That's why we've been seeing those attacks by Iranian-backed groups in Iraq and Syria against U.S. sites there. That's why we saw the death of those 3 U.S. servicemen last weekend. And that's why we're seeing the entire region being brought to the brink of a region-wide war that could really encapsulate all of the Middle East. And that is the big risk here. But when you look at the actors who were part of this mission just this evening, there were the U.S., the U.K. These have been the main actors involved in trying to fight against the Houthis and protecting international shipping. They were backed by 6 other nations. All of this, if you lay them side by side, it's almost exactly the same as that Operation Prosperity Guardian. That was started back in December. It was a coalition of different nations compiled by the U.S. and the U.K. to protect international shipping. And that looks like a mission that is set to continue. Again, sort of similar to what we're seeing in Iraq and Syria, that effort against Iranian-backed groups, but in a way, totally different.
Totally different, and yet cause of concern tonight as we see more and more military operations across the region. Matt Bradley starting us off in Israel. Matt, thank you so much. Let's switch gears back to the politics here. Our reporters are fanned out across South Carolina as we await these primary results from the Democratic primary. MSNBC correspondent Tremaine Lee is in North Charleston for us. Campaign embed Sarah Dean is just south in Charleston, and campaign embed Nnamdi Egwonu is live for us at a watch party in Columbia. It's great to have all 3 of you with us. So we're going to get the results all together. We're going to try to parse them as we start getting them. But Tremaine, I'll start with you. You've been having conversations with voters. What are you hearing? What are they telling you about this first official primary for the Democratic Party, and one that has Joe Biden's name officially on the ballot?
I'll tell you what, Eamon, now that the polls have closed, soon we should be able to start sussing out what this primary election results, what it really means. Certainly, it's almost a foregone conclusion that Joe Biden will win. But the conversation has really been about the dueling narratives here. Polling suggests that there's some waning excitement and enthusiasm on the part of specific voters, like young black voters and some black male voters. I spent the last week talking to those groups, and there is a little bit of dissatisfaction, even among Democrats who say they will still vote for Joe Biden. But then out here today, speaking with folks who arrived early this morning and were sprinkling into the polls throughout the day, said they understand what the mission is. And the mission is to get Joe Biden reelected if ultimately it's a Joe Biden-Donald Trump showdown rematch. And so those narratives are what they are. They're narratives. But here on the ground, folks are making their voices heard with their ballots and with their votes. And again, those folks we talked to were actually pretty excited. But soon we should know exactly what those turnout numbers actually looked like to see how many folks actually were enthused to come out and vote today.
Sarah, let me bring you into the conversation and kind of pick up on something that Tremaine was talking about, and this is going to come down to enthusiasm. Obviously, he is a president running for re-election. That already incorporates a little bit of suppression of numbers in a primary that is not very contested. But what are you hearing from voters there on the ground in terms of what you're seeing turnout and what they're telling you about enthusiasm?
Yeah, Eamon. Well, just about over 330 voters cast their ballots here at Stiles Point Elementary School in James Island in Charleston today. The last voters just left. There was a very slow but steady trickle throughout the day. And what I heard from voters is their mind is already on the general election. Almost every conversation I had today, Donald Trump was brought up either by name or an indirect reference. And Joe Biden, a lot of voters were casting their vote for him in part due to the fact that they are thinking about the general election and they are concerned about another Trump administration. And you might think these voters, you mentioned enthusiasm, don't have any concerns about Joe Biden. They came out here on a Saturday in a pretty non-competitive Democratic primary to cast their vote for the incoming president. But that was actually not the case. I heard lots of concerns today. I heard concerns about President Joe Biden's age. I heard people say that they want more progressive policies from the president. I even heard someone say that they wished that he had stepped aside and not run again. But despite all of that, they still came out and supported him today. And largely, as I said, that was due to the fact that they're thinking about the general election and they think the Republican nominee is likely to be Donald Trump. Amen.
All right, Tremaine Lee, Sarah Dean, thank you so much. We're going to check back in with both of you later. We've lost our connection with Nnamdi, but we'll hopefully reestablish that. Let's cross over now to MSNBC national political correspondent Steve Kornacki at the big board for us, though, in Washington, D.C., not here in New York. Hi, Steve, it's good to see you, my friend. So we just heard from our reporters there about enthusiasm, about turnout, and I think those are probably going to be the early numbers. We know it is a foregone conclusion. Joe Biden's going to win, but how should we be reading the numbers as they come in tonight?
Yeah, and polls are now closed. You see our official designation is too early to call. We will not have an exit poll tonight, so this is the old-fashioned way. We're just going to wait to see some counties come in, get a sense of where this is before the decision desk makes any official call on this. But, yeah, it's a question here of what the turnout is and how Biden does compared to Phillips and Williams and what the margin is. Just as a reminder, last time around 4 years ago, big Democratic field. Biden came to South Carolina wounded. He'd been blown out in Iowa, blown to smithereens in New Hampshire. Nevada didn't go much better, and all of a sudden he turned it around in South Carolina, getting nearly 50% of the vote, transformed the entire Democratic race, and that's why Biden has tried to make South Carolina the first official Democratic contest. It's the first one where his name will appear on the ballot. Now, in New Hampshire, Biden won as a write-in candidate. He got 65% of the vote in New Hampshire. Phillips got 20. So that was Biden not on the ballot, just having his name written in, and that was New Hampshire, a state he only got about 8% of the vote in 4 years ago. This is South Carolina, where Biden did incredibly 4 years ago and where his name is on the ballot. So I think you'd expect that number to be significantly higher tonight, maybe 80% plus. We'll see what comes in here officially. In terms of turnout and what actually constitutes good turnout, and again, we're just kind of waiting here. Any minute now, one of these counties could light up, and that could give us a pretty good idea here. But in terms of what constitutes good turnout or bad turnout in a primary like this, the truth is, it's really kind of hard to say, and I'll show you why. This is the black vote, by the way, in past Democratic primaries in South Carolina. And again, you see Biden winning it big in 2020, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama. But here's the turnout in past Democratic primaries in South Carolina, and the key is this: 1996, 2012. Those are the years that are like this year because those are the years where incumbent Democratic presidents were running for re-election. And the problem is in South Carolina, it's a tradition in both parties. If you got an incumbent running for re-election, they cancel the primary. So no primary in 96, no primary in 12. Those would be the years you'd look for a comparison in terms of turnout here. Otherwise, you see the numbers are all over the place here. So very tough to tell. And only one president actually has even faced a primary, an incumbent president in South Carolina. It was a Republican. It was George Bush Sr. back in 92. Pat Buchanan came out of New Hampshire where he'd done unexpectedly well. Bush beat him by 41 points back then. So those are really the only benchmarks that we have. That, and again, as I say, as a write-in candidate, Biden got 65 in New Hampshire. This state looks better for him on paper for all sorts of reasons, not to mention the fact that his name is on the ballot. So again, you'd expect the number significantly better than that. But in terms of the turnout question, we're going to be looking in particular at counties with large black populations. The Democratic electorate in South Carolina typically is majority African-American. As we just showed you, it was African-American voters who gave Biden that huge victory, who were primarily responsible for that huge South Carolina victory 4 years ago. So we're going to look at a county like this tonight. We don't know what order these are going to come in, but Allendale County has the highest black population, concentration of black voters in the entire state. You can take a look here 4 years ago how Biden did here. Remember, he got less than 50 statewide. He got nearly 60 in this county. So what we want to look at here is, is the turnout in a county like this relative to the rest of the state, is it low or is it high? That's going to get to that question of that core African-American voter block that Joe Biden thinks is sort of his base, the key base for him. Are they motivated to turn out in this primary? Because we've seen evidence in polling that black voters may not be that motivated right now. You heard Tremaine talking about certain subgroups there. So the question is Is that something we see in these returns tonight in counties with large black populations? Orangeburg County, another one we're going to look at. This has one of the highest concentrations of black voters in the state. Biden got nearly 70% of the vote here 4 years ago. He did get 70% in Williamsburg. I'm giving you all counties that have the largest black populations in the state. Lee County, nearly 70% of the vote. So there's a whole bunch of counties in this sort of middle area in the state that are like this, that we're going to be looking at. In terms of bigger counties, this is the biggest in the state. This is Richland County. This is where the state capital, Columbia, is. This is about 50% black by population, and you see Biden here ran a little bit better than he did statewide in 2020. But again, we are waiting right now, Eamon, and I was hoping that in the course of my meandering filibuster here, one of these counties would light up, because I think as soon as we get a result, it'll be very telling. So again, in South Carolina, it's a little, typically the returns in that first half hour are a little slow, but typically you do get reports from one or two counties, and that might be all it takes to really give us a sense of what's going on in South Carolina tonight.
Well, I'm going to say the caveat that we all say to you, don't go too far away, because obviously as soon as we got those results, we're going to come back and try to make more sense of them. Steve Kornacki for us at the big board in D.C. Thank you. Let's bring into the conversation Jonathan Capehart, my friend and host of MSNBC's Capehart. Jonathan, it's great to see you. Thank you for pulling double duty for us. So I want to get your thoughts. I mean, what should we be looking out for tonight? What are you going to be looking out for as these results start to trickle in?
So I'm going to be focused on turnout, and I'm glad that Steve gave us that primer that in 96 and 2000, which would be the more analogous years that are analogous to this year, there were no primaries. I would also point out that in 2000 there was no primary because Vice President Al Gore was basically an incumbent, but he was running for president. But here's why I'm looking at turnout. In New Hampshire, President Biden wasn't even on the ballot, and yet he won the write-in, and that was a big tell from New Hampshire, where New Hampshire basically said, yeah, you opted to kick us out as the first primary, and you didn't even campaign in this state, but we're going to send a message to the country that we are behind you. In South Carolina, the state that put Joe Biden in the White House by helping him win the primary there and then eventually the nomination, he then makes South Carolina the first Democratic primary, because it's a state that not only looks more like the Democratic Party, but also looks more like the nation than Iowa and New Hampshire. But you know, he's the incumbent. I think people pretty much expect he's going to win. So I'm looking at if we have low turnout, and whatever that might be, low turnout, could that be that folks figured, he's going to win, there's no need for me to show up at the polls this go round? Will those people turn out in November? However, if there's a high turnout, however we're defining that, if there's a high turnout, could that be that South Carolinians, particularly black South Carolinians, are stepping out front and saying, like they did in 2020, we're not letting the rest of the country tell us what to think and who we should vote for. We're going to tell the country who we think should be the nominee. And if South Carolina comes out in big numbers for an incumbent president who has a nominal challenge but sends a message that they definitively are behind him and want him to be the nominee, that would be a big story.
A big story and a very important message, I think, that the Biden administration would certainly use in the coming days as they try to build the momentum from that turnout going into other primaries and notably Super Tuesday. Jonathan, thank you so much for giving us your initial thoughts. We are going to be in touch with you throughout the show. Please stick around. We also are going to go back to Steve Kornacki in a little bit as we work to answer that key question. What is driving South Carolina voters to the polls today? Stay with us.
What's the motivation for you all for supporting Joe Biden another term?
No, Trump is one of the main things. You can't have Trump as president. And I take every opportunity to vote.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We are back with MSNBC's continuing coverage of the South Carolina Democratic primary. We're going to bring in Steve Kornacki in a little bit, but right now I want to bring into our conversation our panel to help us break down all what we are expecting this evening. With us right now, Adrian Elrod, as well as Chuck Rocha, and with me here on set, the Reverend Al Sharpton. So, Rev, I'll start with you as we await these kind of initial numbers and what we should be looking out for. Give me your take on how you are reading the importance of South Carolina and, more importantly, the voices coming out of South Carolina in terms of what this will mean for whoever wins tonight, presumptively the Biden administration.
Well, I think that a lot of what we ought to look at, one, we don't know how to measure the turnout because it's no real speculation that Biden won't win the primary. The question will be, do a lot of people come out, and what do a lot of people feel in terms of the general election? There's going to be a lot of anti-Trump, but I think some people are also saying that they want to send a message. What I think we've not looked at well is that none of those that have challenged Biden has been able to plug into whatever dissatisfaction we're hearing. Because I don't think what we're talking about is not only Biden will definitely win, but is there a large vote for those Democrats that have challenged Biden, who that appeal, we'll see whether it has taken on a lot or not. So you would say that if people are dissatisfied with him because of age or because the messaging hasn't really said what he's done, they've not been able to plug into that. And if I ran in 2004, if you can't get your message out against an incumbent, then you must ask, well, maybe the incumbent is stronger with the party than we thought.
We got our first results in, so hold that thought for everyone else. I just want to cross over to Steve Kornacki, who's going to bring us in with those numbers. Steve?
Yeah, basically what we got, Eamon, is Charleston County, a big chunk of Charleston County, probably the early vote here. Again, this is where the city of Charleston is. Overall, statewide, Joe Biden getting 97% of the vote. Again, it's basically all from this county, which I can show you. It's about a fifth of the vote in Charleston County. It's almost unanimous for Biden with what's come in so far. Just as a point of reference, this is about 4,500 votes that we've counted so far, and you can see about 19% in. So at that pace, if that pace were to continue, you'd be at about 22,500, give or take, would be the turnout in this county. By comparison, in 2020, we're talking about turnout in the 2020 Democratic primary, hotly contested, obviously. The turnout in Charleston County was 64,000. So you could see it'd be about a third. They're on pace, at least here with this early voting, they're on pace for about a third of what they got. And we got some vote here in the state capitol as well. This is the biggie. This is Richland County. And again, this is this is as overwhelming and near unanimous as you're going to see in a primary so far. Biden at 98% here. Again, this looks like the early vote that's tabulated. We're getting some more in Darlington County here. Again, this is about half the vote is in. You just give you a sense here. This is there's a large black population here. You can see Biden did over 60% here last time around. He did 53 in Richland. He's at 98 right now. I think Florence has a little bit. It's literally 9 votes in Florence County. Charleston County, as we showed you, Biden, this was actually one of the weaker counties for Biden. This is not a county in terms of relative to other South Carolina counties. Charleston County does not have a large black population, and it's actually lower than the statewide average. And again, you saw black voters powered Biden so much in 2020. The counties that had lower black populations, he didn't do as well in, but at least what we're seeing so far in Charleston County tonight, that not at all the case here. So again, you add that together statewide, and you can see it is official. And it probably has been for a couple minutes, but the check mark means our decision desk has called the South Carolina Democratic primary for the incumbent president, Joe Biden. NBC News is projecting that he will win the South Carolina Democratic primary. You probably don't need me to tell you that with numbers like this. But again, about 6% in statewide. You just see we will continue to get counties like this on the board. And we'll, I think at this point, it's just a question of margin. It's a question of what you can read into turnout, if you can read anything at all. The numbers tell the story, Eamon.
All right, our thanks to Steve Kornacki for that. And as we just said there, Joe Biden, the president, the incumbent president, is the projected winner of the Democratic primary in South Carolina. Steve, we'll touch base with you in a little bit. Let's go to our political panelists and bring in Adrian Elrod and Chuck Rocha. Adrian, I'll start with you on this one. And to the point that Steve was making, it is hardly a surprise that Joe Biden won this. But the enthusiasts within the Biden campaign will say this was expected. And we're also expecting the numbers not to be as high as they were in 2020, the voter turnout, because of the fact that he is incumbent and hardly a competitive primary. But at the same time, the pessimists may be looking at this and say the voter turnout is going to be the key determining factor here. How should we be reading it throughout the course of the evening?
Well, look, I think you just sort of nailed it where, you're looking at a couple different buckets here. I mean, first of all, he won the state. That's a huge deal. This is the first, as you noted earlier, the first primary that we really recognize in the Democratic Party. It's also a very diverse state. So Joe Biden doing very well in South Carolina among diverse voters goes very far. And is a very good sign going into the rest of the primary season. But look, from a reminiscent standpoint, I mean, this is a state that means a lot to President Biden, means a lot to his campaign. It's the state that ultimately, turned the trajectory of the primary around for him in a positive way, ultimately delivering him the Democratic nomination. So I think, the campaign has invested resources in the state to make sure that they do well in this primary. They want to show South Carolinians how grateful they are for all of the support that they gave him in 2020. And again, this is a meaningful evening for the president. It really kicks off primary season in many respects, even though Joe Biden is obviously going to be the nominee. So I think it's great that he's doing well so far. And, more turnout or less turnout, I think just recognizing his diverse coalition is really what South Carolina is delivering tonight.
Yeah, an important message that is being sent out, perhaps either not just to the Democratic Party, but to pivoting to the general election there, Chuck. And it was something that Rev said that I wanted to come back to, and it really had to do more with the other candidates. Not that they were serious contenders, as we are seeing from these early results, but the other two names, Congressman Dean Phillips, Marianne Williamson, two-part question for you. They weren't able to tap into if there was any resentment against the Biden campaign or the Biden presidency. And two, where do they go from here? Is this something that they should consider dropping out as a result of tonight?
Eamon, that's a good question. And I remind everybody that 4 years ago tonight, I was in South Carolina. And I can promise you, as the guy who helped run Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign, folks in South Carolina love them some Joe Biden. And it's proven again tonight. And so what you have to look at here, and folks knew Joe Biden was going to win, first in the nation. We give him props. Amazing job by Jamie Harrison, who's also from South Carolina. But what you're looking at tonight in a presidential campaign is trying to get rid of some of this narrative about you're losing some of the black vote. Black men are moving away from you. There could be a little movement here and there, but tonight and today, Eamon, they got to kick the tires on the truck. So they went out into the community and they could test their GOTV operations, which they will have to have, and the Rev knows this. To actually win the presidency, you need to win the black vote in Philadelphia, Milwaukee, and in Detroit. And that's what tonight was about.
Really quick, Rev, is that the same motivating factor among black voters in Philadelphia and in the North versus South Carolina and black voters there?
No, you're going to have to earn the vote everywhere.
Right.
But I think the indication here is that if these numbers hold up anywhere near where they look now, is that black voters decided, even though they knew the conclusion, they came out and voted for Joe Biden. Now the question is, do you fine-tune your messaging to make sure you get a bigger turnout in the general election and in the other primaries? But the fact that you're seeing people did come out to vote for Biden and did not vote for any of the candidates that were challenging Biden, this whole right-wing media that there's dissatisfaction among Democrats, that's not being demonstrated in South Carolina tonight, because you would have expected a movement of disaffected Democrats to come out and vote against him. And it doesn't appear that that's going to be the case.
All right, panel, stick with me. I want to cross over to MSNBC's Tremaine Lee, who is at a polling location. So we are getting the initial numbers that you probably heard, and also we are projecting that Joe Biden has won the South Carolina primary. Not a surprise. But give us a sense of what you have been hearing throughout the day and certainly this primary result.
Yeah, I mean, now that we're well past polls being closed, I just wanted to bring you into the Charleston County Board of Voter Registration and Elections. You see here that polling data is coming in from all over Charleston County, from 182 different precincts, 88 different polling locations. Again, soon we'll have a better sense, as you guys have been talking about, is just the force and enthusiasm in which black voters in particular have showed up and showed out for President Biden. There had been a tale of two electorates, basically. This polling that's been reflected in some of what I've been hearing from folks, that there is waning enthusiasm and waning excitement. Yet on the ground here, as we know, elections are about who comes and who actually casts their ballot. There was a lot of excitement for Joe Biden. Folks who were clear about the mission, that it was to restore Joe Biden to the White House if he indeed is going against Trump once again. And so even though there's been a lot of speculation, a lot of talk here, those who were coming out to vote were enthusiastic. The big question is, though, how many of those folks who feel a little disconnected, feel disaffected, feel not touched by the Democratic Party and Joe Biden will ultimately show up later. Now, again, folks are looking at South Carolina as a barometer, a bellwether to see how other folks in other states, important key states like Wisconsin and Georgia and Pennsylvania, how black voters there will be voting. But again, even though we've been hearing a lot about this lack of excitement, enthusiasm, folks did show up, and it'd be great to see some of those numbers, which again here are still pouring in. Amen.
Adrian, talk about momentum and the importance of momentum, taking a vote or taking a win in the primary in South Carolina and building on that for the Biden campaign. As we know from 2020, New Hampshire was a setback, Iowa was a setback, but when he hit South Carolina, he was able to break through and really build a momentum that honestly delivered him straight to the White House. How do they capitalize on that momentum again to keep the campaign full steam ahead going into a general election?
Well, first of all, Eamon, you capitalize by making sure that you are investing in this state. I mean, President Biden's campaign, he knew he was going to win South Carolina. He could have literally dropped $0 in the state and still had a really resounding victory in South Carolina. But that's not what this campaign did. They invested in a ground game. They have a very strong state operation in South Carolina. And they did this for several reasons. Number one, to your point, this is the first Democratic primary that we recognize within the Democratic primary system. New Hampshire was obviously a different situation. There was a strong write-in campaign. I think that the campaign was very excited that people came out to write in President Biden's name, even though he wasn't officially on the ballot there. But this is the official first contest, and it's a very diverse stage. You'll recall, Eamon, the DNC, it was somewhat controversial, but most of the people in the party were very excited that the Democratic National Committee moved the South Carolina primary up to be the first in the nation because it is a diverse state. So I think if you're President Biden, you're saying, okay, back in 2020, yes, I had a rocky road getting to South Carolina, Iowa, and New Hampshire, but South Carolina is a diverse state. So as the Rev was saying, as Chuck was saying earlier, being able to go forward in this primary process and show strength among diverse voters, sort of push back against some of those narratives out there that, maybe the campaign is losing support among black men, being able to go forward and say, here's a very diverse state with a very large black population, and President Biden did very well in that state. So I think this gives him a lot of momentum going through the primary process, and again, diversity here being the key.
All right, speaking of voters, let's cross back over to Tremaine, who I believe actually has been now speaking to some voters that we can hear from.
I'll tell you what, Eamon, what I heard today was a bit, I wouldn't say of a level set, but again, actually did push back against some of the narratives that I have been hearing in recent weeks. The gentleman named Haley Hall, who's a librarian here, kind of made it plain in a way that I think spoke to a lot of voters. Take a listen. So there's been a lot of talk about voter excitement or lack thereof, people either checking out or checking in, coming out to vote for the Democrat today. What got you out here? Were you driven by any excitement at all? How are you feeling about Joe Biden? Tell me about it.
I think Joe Biden's doing a great job with all the things that he's doing, whether it's the economy or improving our relationships internationally. I think he's doing a lot for us, and I want to show my support for him.
That is the one thing that you hear from folks who actually are plugged into the issues and aware of what the administration has done. There just seems to be a disconnect between that positive message that resonates with him and some other folks who clearly are unaware of some of that progress. But again, that kind of voter is the kind that showed up today, those who are informed and mission-driven. Amen.
All right, let's cross over to Steve Kornacki at the big board with some more numbers. Steve?
Well, what do you do when it's 97 to 2 to 1 in terms of trying to dissect the vote? Look, one thing we can tell you that's a little interesting, just maybe to add to the conversation here, is it's just what's been reported so far in South Carolina. The thing that's most noteworthy to me is actually the 3 counties with the lowest share of black population in the state are three that we've got reports from. You got two right up here in the upcountry, and you got Horry County where Myrtle Beach is. These three counties have by far, we're talking single digits here in terms of the percentage of residents who are African American. As a matter of fact, this is Pickens County right here. This is the home of Clemson University. This has the smallest black population by percentage in the state. And look at this. This was Biden's worst county in the 2020 primary. He only got 33% of the vote here. Tonight, it's just as unanimous for Biden so far in Pickens County, a gain of 62 points for him. And again, this is coming presumably largely overwhelmingly from white voters who were not on his side in the 2020 primary. They are tonight in the same numbers you're seeing in every other county. I mean, take a look at Myrtle Beach, 96% here. Again, this has the third lowest share of black residents in the entire state. Look what it was in 2020. Biden was 44%. Tonight, near unanimous. Take a look. This is the second lowest share of black voters in the state. Biden didn't even touch 40% here 4 years ago. He's at 95% tonight. So at Rock Hill, this is York County. Again, this is a little bit higher, but still lower than the state average when it comes to the share of black voters. Again, you're just seeing the same number. It's 95, 6, 7 in every county right now. So we're going to wait on some more to get some of these majority black counties where you have a big share of the vote to come in. We can start talking about turnout and stuff. But I guess, besides the fact that Biden is just nearly unanimously winning this primary right now, the biggest growth we're seeing right now in his support, it's the same number every county in the state. That means white voters who were reluctant in 2020 and with Sanders or with Buttigieg or some of these other candidates, they're just as in line now, I think, as black voters are, at least in this primary.
All right, Steve, thanks for breaking down that for us. Let's bring in Nnamdi Egwonu right now. He's joining us from a Democratic Party, from the Democratic Party's watch party, I should say, in Colombia, with actually James Clyburn. I believe he is there. Representative James Clyburn is there at that watch party. Tell us what you're hearing and what the mood, and obviously now that Joe Biden is the projected winner, what are you hearing from those in attendance?
Yeah, Eamon, you can feel the excitement in the room, even though there wasn't really a question that Joe Biden was going to win this state's primary. The fact that it happened and he's going to be winning by a large margin did cause some excitement. The highlight of the night was, though, Representative Jim Clyburn did take the stage and speak, and two notable things happened. One, he referenced Joe Biden's victory in New Hampshire and looked into DNC chair Jamie Harrison's eyes and said, find a way to make those delegates count, which is something that we hadn't heard. We, of course, know that the DNC decided to not award New Hampshire any delegates after they chose to still hold their primary ahead of South Carolina. But even more than that, Joe Biden actually called in. Jim Clyburn dialed him up on the phone, and his first question to the people in the room was, you guessed it, what was the turnout like? He's just as curious as we all are about just how many people are going to turn out to vote and support him. Of course, Clyburn had to say, we don't yet know, but that tells you where the mind of the president is at this moment. He later thanked the audience and ended by telling them, you're not going to get rid of me yet, I will be back.
All right, Nnamdi, thank you so much. Let's bring back in our panel and bring into the conversation Jonathan Capehart with us. Rev, I'll start with you, and we just got a statement from the Biden-Harris campaign. I'm going to read a part of it for all of us. As I said 4 years ago, this campaign is for everyone who has been knocked down, counted out, and left behind. That is still true today, with more than 14 million new jobs and a record 24 straight months, 2 years of the unemployment rate under 4%, including a record low unemployment rate for black Americans. We are leaving no one behind. This is something you and I were talking about before the show, when we were talking about how much of this is the fear set in among people that the Republican candidate is Trump, and we know what that means for our country, as much as it is about what Joe Biden has done for the voters of America, specifically in a case like South Carolina for black voters, because of how much they are the backbone of the Democratic Party that propelled him to the presidency. Talk to me about that. What do you hear from the people that you speak to about how much of this turnout is going to be about the fear of losing to Donald Trump and what he means for our country and what Joe Biden is doing for voters?
Well, I think a lot of it is going to be the fear of Donald Trump. And I think a lot of it is going to be what is in the interest of the voters. And what the Biden-Harris ticket has to do is show what they've done and what they could have done if they weren't blocked by the Republican Congress and the Supreme Court. Let's not forget, when we talk about young voters, a lot of the issues that they have is student debt loan. Well, Biden put through student debt loan, and the Supreme Court knocked it back. Well, who stacked the Supreme Court? Donald Trump and the Republicans. If they message on I did A, B, C, D. I did student loan. I cut black unemployment down to historic lows now. I've done with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act, got black contractors involved. These are the things I did. And I tried to do George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. The Senate Republicans blocked it.
Yeah,
I tried to do John Lewis Voting Act. The Senate Republicans blocked it. If we talk about what many of us are saying in the black community, we want to see more. If he comes back with, I tried to do more, they stopped me, which is why I need you all to come out and vote for me again and bring me a Senate and a Congress. It changes the conversation. And I think when you see in New Hampshire a write-in vote that is not a black vote, then you see tonight a diverse vote in South Carolina. It gives them a lot to work with. The challenge is, will they know how to work it?
So, Capehart, that question, I guess I'll ask you. Will they know how to capitalize on this to go forward? And the dangers of misreading the fundamental question of turnout in South Carolina's vote. How risky is that going to be?
Okay, so I reached out to DNC Chairman Jamie Harrison before we went on the air saying, I'm going to be on between 7 and 9, any tidbits you can give me. And just before this panel started, he sent me this text message, and he said I can attribute it to him. Early vote numbers, 13% more black than 2020. 13% more black than 2020. 2020 was a presidential election year. That was when Joe Biden's campaign hobbled into South Carolina, having won no state. But anybody who was paying attention to South Carolina in 2020 knew that that was going to be the first opportunity for black voters to tell the rest of the country who they thought should be the Democratic nominee, and they made it clear that that person should be Joe Biden. And according to the DNC chairman, Jamie Harrison, this year, in a year when it's not really a contested primary, even though Marianne Williamson and Dean Phillips are in the race, and also, as Kornacki pointed out several times, that we don't have an analogous year to point to because the president is an incumbent, and just as in '96 and in losing track of time, I think 2012, the president was the Democratic president was the incumbent, so the primary was canceled. But the fact that in 2024, when the incumbent president has two challengers in a state where the black population is a huge chunk of the electorate in the Democratic Party, that he is getting 13% more of the black vote than tonight than he did in 2020, a presidential election year, sends a very clear message, I think, should send a very clear message to us in the press, it should send a clear message to folks in the Democratic Party, and it should send a message to the nation that President Biden is on firm ground when it comes to the foundation of the Democratic Party, and therefore the foundation of his support going into November.
No, I'm really glad that you shared that number with us. Let me bring Steve Kornacki in to weigh in on that. So, Steve, any insight or any visibility into that number that Jamie Harrison just gave our colleague Jonathan Capehart, about 13% more black voters this time around compared to 2020?
Yeah, I think he was citing the early vote, so always take that into consideration, because the same day there can be variance there. And in a lot of these counties, that's what we're waiting on. We get the early vote. For instance, Charleston County was the first thing that we saw results from tonight. Now they're starting to report out the same day vote. I mean, I'm not expecting any huge shifts right here, but you want to see, out of curiosity, is this going to stay at 97? Is it going to fall down to anything like that? So what I'm seeing, though, big picture, just county to county, like I said, we've got a range now of counties that are reporting substantial vote here. As I said, the three counties with the lowest proportions of black voters in the entire state, we've got results. We've got a lot of results from all three of those, and Biden's running 96, 97% in all of them. We've also got results from some majority black counties as well here. Biden, again, running 97, 98, 96% in that ballpark. I'm looking to see if there's any turnout imbalance so far between them. What I'm seeing so far, this is just broad math here. We have to dive into it a little bit more later. But they're all running about a third, a little bit more than a third of their 2020 level in terms of turnout. All these counties seem to be. So, 2020, obviously a high interest year. Just put this in some perspective. I have the turnout totals here. This is old voter data, but I want to show you. This is turnout in South Carolina Democratic primaries. This was the first one back in 1992. Like we said, we're kind of flying blind. We don't have a Democratic primary when an incumbent's been running to compare turnout to. We have competitive Democratic primaries here. You can see the Kerry year, the Obama year, Clinton, Sanders. That was Biden in 2020. So if you end up at about a third, if you end up at about a third of the 2020 number, that's going to take you to about 180,000. It gets very, very rough right now. We want to get full results from these counties, but right now they seem to be running about a third, maybe a little bit more than a third. That'd be about 180,000 turnout. So you can put that in some perspective. Those, high interest years of 20 and 8, these are all contested, very contested primaries. 16, 2004, John Kerry, John Edwards. And this is where it would fall if it runs at about a third, 180,000. 1992, again, that was Bill Clinton. That was the first. South Carolina had been a caucus state. That was the first year they went to a primary on the Democratic side. But that's about where that would clock in. And again, we just don't have, it's tough for me to say, is that a great number for Democrats? Does that say anything about enthusiasm? The big thing these results are just shouting is there's no appetite among Democratic voters for a contested primary for Joe Biden. Right. When he's winning New Hampshire, the ultimate high-interest, high-voter turnout primary state on write-ins with 2/3 of the vote, and now he's getting a number like this in South Carolina. Right now, it's not screaming anything immediate to me about turnout. It's just screaming to me that every Democrat who basically bothered to turn out today is sort of delivering a message, we're good to go for the general election.
Yeah, good to go, and the motivation is there, as Tremaine was pointing out, and the gentleman that he spoke to, Rev, was that, if you're voting now, and because it is not a contested primary, or not a competitive one is the more accurate word, you're going to vote to send a message, and you're motivated. You're not somebody who's like, I'll deal with this when I have to, because it's an inconsequential vote for those who are going to say it's definitely going to be Joe Biden.
Absolutely, and that's what I'm saying. A lot of the skeptics now will have to explain why this is the case. There was no, apparently, a vote out that came out to say, Joe Biden, I want to send you a message in the Democratic Party. It was that, Joe Biden, I want to say that I'm with you. And these are people that did not have a incentive to vote other than to send that message if these numbers hold up. And if I were those that were predicting that there was this mass dissatisfaction, it does not mean that people don't want a lot more. But it does mean that it appears that from the write-in in New Hampshire to what we're beginning to see in South Carolina tonight, that the dissatisfaction is not as rampant as they thought. And a lot of it is, yes, we're dissatisfied, but we also know about the sabotage that was done on a lot of the things we're concerned about, the bills that I named, from the John Lewis voting bill to the George Floyd policing bill. We a lot of our narratives have been in the media that Joe Biden was the one that stopped these bills, and that is not true. And I think that if you get that in the primaries, imagine if, in fact, he is the nominee, which it appears he will, when he's running against a guy who was against the John Lewis bill and against the George Floyd bill and the other things people are dissatisfied about. So if I was the Biden campaign, I'd be fine-tuning my message, saying the things I couldn't do, I was blocked, and you've got to help me break that block.
So well, luckily for us, we've got some political strategists to help us with that messaging. Chuck, give me your messaging here going forward for the Biden administration. To pick up on the Rev's point, you've got the vote in New Hampshire, significant win. You've got South Carolina, also an important message coming out of it tonight. And then what do you take from these two early primary states to the general election? Because it's clear that the Biden administration or the Biden campaign has already, after New Hampshire, pivoted to the general election, and now they need to start honing that message into the general audience.
I think that what you've seen on the campaign trail, and I'll take you back to the president in Virginia this week, he's went a lot more after Donald Trump, and that's what you're going to see. When you start moving towards the general election, you have to have a stark contrast. The Rev was absolutely right. He should be leaning in and screaming from the rooftops all the things that he's been working on, that he's got accomplished, and still the work that is ahead. The American people aren't stupid. They just want the facts and the truth, but they're getting a lot of misinformation from lots of people. So as a strategist, as a guy who runs campaigns for a living, you got to get in front of that. And you got to be strong, and you have to speak to the American people and be frank with the American people. Joe Biden has been underestimated, and I even underestimated him, and I've run a presidential campaign against him. He's got a good team, and he's got a good message, but now it's time to turn to Trump and make sure people know what's at risk if Donald Trump is the president again, because we've already seen a little sample of what could happen, but now it's real.
Adrian, part of the criticism that the Biden administration has faced on some of these issues is that they had not been listening to the base of the Democratic Party with some of these protests that have been taking place regarding a ceasefire in Gaza, some of the discontent with some of the issues that the Rev outlined, that they were not necessarily aware that it was because the Supreme Court or because Republicans blocked these measures. And so going forward, there was this nervousness about whether or not that was going to translate ultimately in some of these early primary states. I guess my question to you about those concerns, how does the administration walk that fine line between saying we hear some of the concerns within the party, but we also see the resounding victories that we've gotten in these two primary states?
Yeah, look, I think the Rev just nailed it per the usual. You got to go out there and talk about your accomplishments, of which there are many from the administration, and they are talking about the accomplishments. 4 major economic bills, which have delivered over 14 million jobs, record GDP, unemployment under 4% for more than 2 years. There's a lot to talk about. But at the same time, not everyone is feeling some of those economic benefits. Not everyone is happy and satisfied with where they are. So I think you've got to make it clear that, yes, you are the president. You are working to overcome whatever obstacles are in place in Congress, the Supreme Court, et cetera. The reality is reality. And if President Trump were reelected president again, he would overturn all of these policies that President Biden has worked so hard to pass, including, of course, historic climate change legislation. And look, from a foreign policy standpoint, I mean, I'm incredibly proud of President Biden. I mean, I am every single day. But I'm proud that he has not allowed some of these protests to dictate foreign policy. He's obviously got work to do when it comes to, working on the Arab American base, shoring that base up, but he has not allowed, some of the protests out here to dictate what he's doing from a foreign policy standpoint, and that is real leadership. So I think there's a long road ahead. Chuck is exactly right. We are now in the general election. President Biden is really taking up the contrast a couple notches. He's making it clear what a Donald Trump presidency would look like again. He's drawing that contrast, and I think you're just going to see more of that, even ratcheted up even more in the days and months to come.
Let me read for you another part of the statement, and I'll get your final thoughts as we wrap up this hour. This is, again, from the Biden-Harris statement after tonight's victory in South Carolina. When I was elected president, I said the days of the backbone of the Democratic Party being at the back of the line were over. That was a promise made and a promise kept. Now you are first in the nation.
They're first in the nation, and we should not lose sight of the fact this is the first time we've had a diverse state like South Carolina with a significant black vote is the first primary. And not only did the DNC under Jamie Harrison make that possible with the power of Jim Clyburn, Biden and them were the ones that delivered that. And they worked hard in this primary. Let's not forget, Joe Biden himself went to the churches and the barbershops in South Carolina, not saying it's a given I'm going to win, I don't care. He worked like he was campaigning against some formidable opposition in his own party. I think people appreciate that. I have an Office of National Action Network in South Carolina. That's what I'm hearing. And a lot of people are saying, yeah, they're doubting him. They doubt us. They always predict us wrong. So a lot of that helps him. But he must again say the things you're concerned about. Despite my victory, I know you're not satisfied. You didn't get a lot of what you wanted, and I was blocked in many of those areas. And the more he brings that home, the more against a guy like Donald Trump. The best thing that can happen to Joe Biden in 2024 is Donald Trump be his opponent.
All right, well, we're going to chance to ask the Biden campaign about that. Reverend Al Sharpton, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. Chuck Rocha, Adrian Elrod, thank you. Jonathan, please stick around. We're going to talk to you in our continuing coverage at the top of the hour. As President Biden, the projected winner in tonight's South Carolina primary, comes into focus, we're going to have live reaction from the Biden-Harris campaign. Spokesperson Michael Tyler going to join me live. And we're also going to have the very latest on those airstrikes, both in Yemen and Iraq by the U.S. and the U.K. Stay with us. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ayman Mohideen in New York. We are continuing our special coverage tonight. The 2024 Democratic primary is officially underway. Last hour polls in South Carolina, the first Democratic contest in the nation, closed. President Joe Biden easily secured a victory there, blowing his rivals, Congressman Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson, out of the water. Now all eyes are on the number of delegates. A total of 55 are up for grabs tonight. Those will be awarded proportionally based on the results. Remember, of course, a candidate needs a total of nearly 2,000 to capture the Democratic nomination. Just a short time ago, President Biden issued a statement thanking the voters of South Carolina, saying in part, quote, "In 2020, it was the voters of South Carolina who proved the pundits wrong, breathed new life into our campaign, and set us on the path to winning the presidency. Now in 2024, the people of South Carolina have spoken again, and I have no doubt that you have set us on the path to winning the presidency again and making Donald Trump a loser again." Of course, we are also watching breaking news coming out of the Middle East after the United States and the UK launched a new series of strikes today targeting the Houthis in Yemen. The attacks hit at least 36 targets in at least 36 locations across the country. A senior Biden administration official told NBC News today that the strikes in Yemen and yesterday's attacks on more than 85 targets linked to Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria are not related. But let's go back to politics and first to those live primary results we are getting out of South Carolina. Our team of correspondents are fanned across the state with the very latest. MSNBC correspondent Tremaine Lee is in North Charleston, campaign embed Sarah Dean just south in Charleston, and campaign embed Greg Hyatt is in Greenville for us. Tremaine, I'll start with you. We now have a clear picture of some of those numbers as they are coming in, as we heard from Steve Kornacki. Give us a sense of what the voters have been talking to you about throughout the course of the day, what concerns, what excitement they have about today's vote.
I mean, I'll tell you what, it really was a tale of two electorates in some ways. Some that I spoke with today at the polling place said, you know what, we are mission-driven. Joe Biden has done a great job. But on the other side, it's folks who say, you know what, that great message hasn't landed with me. And we have concerns about his age. We have concerns about what they believe are promises that weren't kept. Again, part of this narrative. But even those folks who were a little less enthused, less excited about voting for Joe Biden still said they would vote for Joe Biden because they understood the other side of the aisle and what's at stake in this election. And so, again, this was always going to be about how excited folks are with their feet and with their ballots. Are folks showing up? And today, folks made clear that they showed up. It's not even, too far past 8 o'clock, and this Board of Elections office is already packing up light work for Joe Biden. And so the message that will come from this, what does this send to other states where folks are looking to gauge how black voters are engaging with the Biden message, right? If this is any indication, even though we don't have the numbers, black voters did show up. They did vote for Joe Biden. And so some of that skepticism, some of the narratives around excitement and whether or not they're enthused or not, I guess we'll have to see it play out. Amen.
All right, Tremaine Lee. Tremaine, stay with us for a moment. Greg, you've been to multiple polling locations as well throughout the day. Any common theme that you're hearing from the folks that you've been speaking to?
Hey, good evening, Eamon. Yeah, some of the common themes that I'm hearing from voters is that they feel quite comfortable with the idea of a hypothetical matchup between President Biden and former President Trump. A lot of the voters believe that President Biden has unfinished business. They look at some of the things that he's been able to put forward in his administration, such as gun legislation when he signed it in the aftermath of the tragedy in Uvalde, Texas, and they look at his handling of abortion. But one thing that I think is quite notable is I talked to one of the county voting directors here in Greenville, and just for context, Eamon, this is a predominantly black area, tends to be a lot of registered Democrats. And he told me that the tally so far for the early projections is that it's about 2%. So it's a low turnout here in Greenville, South Carolina. And I also spoke to a local lawmaker, and he had mentioned that there was a concern about that low turnout and potentially that being a harbinger of what could come in November, because you need that high turnout in these predominantly black areas if it's key for President Biden winning re-election in November of 2024. So that's definitely something that I think is key to highlight. Lower turnout here in the Greenville, South Carolina area, and how that could potentially translate for success in Biden in November of 2024 against former President Trump.
Sarah, let me cross over to you and get a sense from what you've been hearing. And there was this point that my colleague, the Rev, made, which was very interesting, which was that if there was any discontent among voters today, they could have made that point clear to the Biden campaign. It doesn't seem that that discontent was materialized in the way that any votes went to Marianne Williamson or Dean Phillips in a substantial way.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Eamon. I actually spoke to many voters here in the Charleston area that were casting their vote for Joe Biden, and that didn't mean that they didn't have concerns about Joe Biden. Those concerns we've been seeing that are reflected in polls. I spoke to people that were very concerned about Joe Biden's age. I spoke to people that wanted him to do more progressive policies, and I even spoke to someone that said, I wish that he had stepped aside and not run for another term. But yet they were here today at the elementary school casting their vote in the primary, which, as we said, was not a very hyper-competitive primary for the incumbent president on a Saturday. So that could be good news for the Democrats in 2024, that despite these concerns these voters might have, they still came out to vote today. And something that was really on all of their minds, Eamon, was the general election. Most of these voters had their minds made up that Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee, and that was really driving their enthusiasm to come out and vote. Despite all of their concerns about Joe Biden, they were much more concerned about what could happen in a Trump administration. And I even overheard some voters talking about how they would be more concerned about Joe Biden in a general election if Donald Trump weren't the nominee and if, say, their former governor Nikki Haley was.
Oh, interesting. All right. Sarah, Tremaine, Greg, thank you to the three of you for starting us off this hour. Let's go to the big board and bring in MSNBC national political correspondent Steve Kornacki. Steve, polls closed more than an hour. Joe Biden, the projected winner. What are the numbers saying? How are you reading them?
Yeah, I mean, look, they speak for themselves, I guess, but I think the one notable thing here in the last hour is we've now got a quarter of the vote in South Carolina. Initially, what we were getting was big batches of early vote in these counties. And, you know, you're wondering, if you get the same day, would there be any variance? Would that bring the Biden number down? Clearly, it really isn't. Biden's running at 97% statewide. 25% in here. Williamson, Phillips haven't even touched 2%. I mean, I could individualize this county by county, but there really isn't any variance here county by county. We are seeing this, you know, we're talking about the issue of black voter enthusiasm and the core Democratic base for Biden. He's getting 97% in heavily black counties. He's getting 97% in some of the whitest counties, in the whitest counties of the state. It's just across the board here with really no geographical variance. In terms of turnout and what we can say about that so far, we got a couple counties here that aren't at 100, but that are closing in at 100% of the vote in. Start in Bamberg County here. Again, this county is small, but it has one of the largest, at least proportionally, black populations in the state. And you got more than 80% of the vote in right now. Again, it's a very small county. You see the result. It looks like the statewide result. But I think the key here is with 81% of the vote in, Bamberg looks like its overall turnout is running at about 37% of the 2020 turnout number. You know, Biden versus Sanders versus Warren, that primary, the total number of people that turned out in 2020, high interest year, they're getting about 37% of that total. They're on pace for that in Bamberg County. Again, heavily black county here, overwhelmingly Biden. The other county where we got a lot of the vote in here, 2/3 of it, this has the second highest concentration of black residents in the state. Again, a small county, Williamsburg County, but again, 2/3 of the vote is in. They are also on pace to be at 37% of the 2020 turnout level, and 37% when you just do statewide. Also, if you look statewide and you extrapolate with a quarter of the vote what that turnout would translate into, you know, you're probably somewhere in the 180 to 200,000 vote range, you know, broadly somewhere in there. And it's about, you know, 37%, a little bit more than a third of the 2020 total. You know, up in New Hampshire, you know, a week ago, or a couple weeks ago, I should say, January 23rd. I've lost track of the dates, whenever that was. Up in New Hampshire, they were running at about 40% of their 2020 level in the Democratic primary. So again, we've been talking about this. The tough thing with turnout here, and we'll get a fuller picture as over the night, as you know, overnight, as we get full reports from these counties, and we can even look within the counties, and we'll see if there's more enthusiasm or less enthusiasm in some more specific places. But just broadly speaking, county to county here, you know, they're running a little more than a third right now of the 2020 turnout rate. It's uniform across the board in terms of, you know, hey, maybe this would be different in some way if a bigger name Democrat had stepped forward to challenge Biden. That's something that'll never be known. But this collection of challengers, Congressman Dean Phillips, Marianne Williamson, a candidate from 2020, just clearly there's no interest in them among South Carolina Democrats tonight. And that turnout, again, if it's in that 180 to 200,000 range, we'll just show you just a couple of graphics here of historically this is the black vote. But again, we've never had a primary before tonight where a Democratic incumbent was challenged in a primary, and they actually had a primary. So we don't have anything compared to. These are all contested primaries here, and you can see where 180 to 200,000 would fit in if that is indeed where this lands.
All right, Steve Kornacki at the Big Board. Steve, thank you. Stay nearby for us. We'll touch base with you later on in the show. I want to bring in now to the conversation Michael Tyler, the communications director for the Biden-Harris 2024 campaign. Michael, it's great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. I guess congratulations are first in order for this first victory. And I want to start with the mood within the campaign tonight, how you are interpreting tonight's victory in South Carolina.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Certainly a good night for Joe Biden and for Democrats across the country because Joe Biden is once again a winner because he has kept his promises to the backbone of the Democratic Party. That's black voters. You're talking about the data tonight. We were looking at the early vote data earlier today, and about 76% of voters were black. That's compared to 56% in 2020. And so folks are turning out because they understand that they have a president in Joe Biden who's kept his promises, and they understand increasingly, to your point earlier, that we have cemented the choice in this election between Joe Biden, who's been delivering, and between Donald Trump, who presents a fundamental threat to American freedom and American democracy. So we're excited about the road ahead, and we're sort of we're full steam ahead for the general election right now.
Let me, if I can, drill down on the issue of turnout for a moment, just get a sense of how you read turnout or how you want your campaign and the general Democratic Party to read the turnout. Because as my colleague Steve Kornacki was pointing out, it's hard to gauge. We haven't been in a situation like this before. Previous ones, there were no primaries when an incumbent was running. He's expecting the turnout to be anywhere around 37%, which would be slightly less than it was in a very competitive primary back in 2020. How do you read the vote turnout tonight between enthusiasm for the Biden campaign and his reelection versus not?
Well, yeah, I'd start by comparing this to the first Republican contest in Iowa. You had about 110,000 folks turn out for the Iowa caucuses, an incredibly competitive election with multiple candidates. Here in South Carolina tonight, you'll have around 100,000 people turn out for the president because they appreciate everything that he has done over the course of his first term. And they're excited about the future, and they're geared up and understand the sense of urgency for the general election ahead. I think if you want to look at other metrics for enthusiasm, you can look at our grassroots fundraising. We had our best grassroots fundraising month in January. Our Q4 numbers are fantastic. We had $97 million. That's largely through grassroots donations. That's 97% were people who are giving $200 or less. People like teachers and nurses who are chipping in $5 and $10 at a time at JoeBiden.com because they understand, A, what this president has done. 14 million new jobs, 800,000 manufacturing jobs, capping the cost of insulin at $35. And they also understand that we have a threat in Donald Trump, who every single day is bragging about his role in overturning Roe v. Wade, who's rooting for the economy to crash, who's pledging to serve as a dictator on day one. So people understand the stakes, and they understand that we have a fighter in Joe Biden who's going to continue to deliver for them over the course of the next 4 years if we win.
I want to ask you about the threat that Donald Trump poses and certainly that messaging going forward. But let me ask you, as you also mentioned right now, and as in the campaign statement that came out about the importance of black voters, this was widely seen, this primary contest was widely seen as a test for Biden's strength among a critical voting bloc. My colleague Gabe Gutierrez spoke to a young black voter from South Carolina. Take a listen to this.
Do you think that there is enough enthusiasm among young black voters such as yourself?
No, sir. Like, just in all honesty, I think in 2020, like, it was a very emotional time. A lot of people were supporting, well, not supporting, but the Black Lives Matter movement had received great emphasis following the events that happened with Mr. George Floyd. And a lot of emphasis was pushed to vote just as people, and a lot of entertainment outlets because everybody was at home. So voting.
Do you think a lot of people your age will stay home this election?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That is one vote. Obviously, that is one person. It's anecdotal, but I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that. How does the campaign plan to reach a voter like that who doesn't feel as motivated to head to the polls?
Yeah, this campaign knows we can't take any single voter for granted, particularly black voters who have been key to the Biden-Harris coalition and key to Democratic victories for years. And we're going to remind people of exactly what this administration has done on behalf of black communities across the country. Again, record low black unemployment under this administration, black wealth growing by 60% since before the pandemic, $7 billion into HBCUs. And we're going to communicate the contrast, right? We're going to talk about Donald Trump, who, when he was in president, we saw the damage he caused to black America. The only things that went up under Donald Trump's presidency for black folks was the unemployment rate and the uninsured rate. His tax cut, for example, gave double the benefit to the typical white household and the typical black household. He fumbled the bag on the COVID response, leaving black people disproportionately dead and leaving black businesses disproportionately shuttered. So we're going to communicate what our vision is, what our accomplishments are, and we're going to contrast that against the damage that Donald Trump has caused when he had power and the damage that he will cause if he's able to regain power.
How do we, right now and certainly after tonight, how do we look at whether the campaign is shifting its attention to the general election, or has that focus already shifted to that inevitable rematch with Donald Trump?
Yeah, we are absolutely focused on the general election against Donald Trump. He's marching towards the Republican nomination. We are focused on building an apparatus that can take him on and get to 270 electoral votes. That's absolutely what we're focused on at this stage in the race.
What does that apparatus look like? What does that messaging look like in order to defeat Donald Trump again?
Yeah, it looks like scaling up our operation in all of the battleground states, making sure that we are fully funded with staffing on the ground. It's our paid advertising efforts. It's our digital organizing efforts. It's a 360-degree effort to communicate with the voters who are going to decide this election. So certainly more to come, and so stay tuned.
And let me ask you finally before I let you go, because you mentioned the battleground states. Obviously, a lot of concern about the state of Michigan because of the protests that were taking place there over Thursday. Are you at all concerned about states like Michigan and Arab American voters, Muslim American voters, with the president's handling of the war in Gaza?
Yeah, we're certainly concerned about every state. We're concerned about Michigan as well. We are reminding folks, A, that the president is approaching the conflict as the commander-in-chief, not through the lens of politics, and that is going to continue to engage with the community from now through November and through the next 4 years when he is reelected. People elected Joe Biden because he has the empathy, the decency, and the seriousness of purpose to serve as commander-in-chief and to serve as president, and we believe that that stands in stark contrast to people like Donald Trump, who's running a campaign of revenge, of retribution, of harm, because he cares about himself and certainly has no business stepping back into the Oval Office. So we will engage with the community, and we will continue to present our vision and contrast that with our opponent in Donald Trump.
All right, Michael Tyler, Director of Communications for the Biden-Harris 2024 campaign. Sir, thank you so much for your time. Again, congratulations on the win this evening. Greatly appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
We're just getting started this hour. We have lots more analysis to get to, but when we come back, we're going live to the Middle East with the very latest on today's strikes in Yemen. Stay with us. All right, welcome back, everyone. We are, of course, tracking those Democratic primary results coming out of South Carolina. We're going to have more on that throughout the hour, but we're also following major breaking news coming out of the Middle East. The United States, the United Kingdom striking 36 Houthi targets in 13 locations across Yemen today amid fears of a widening war in the region. Joining me now with the very latest from Tel Aviv is NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley. Matt, it's good to have you with us. So you had a senior administration official saying that today's attacks were actually unrelated to yesterday's strikes in Iraq and Syria. Break that down for us, because the significance of that means is that the United States is now operating in two separate tracks within this conflict. What is happening in Iraq and Syria, what is happening in Yemen, and the concerns that this war is widening now to include multiple countries, if you include what Israel's doing in Lebanon, what it is doing in Syria, and now what America is doing in both Syria, Iraq, and Yemen.
Yeah, I mean, there are two common threads here, Eamon, and one is Iran. This is all involving the Iranian-led axis of resistance, which involves Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, these Iran-backed, they called them Hashd al-Shaabi in Iraq, and then in Syria, also Iran-backed groups. And then, sometimes people often will lump in the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria into this so-called axis of resistance. All of these groups, for the first time really ever in history, have now been acting in concert, and not just against Israeli targets ever since the October 7th attacks, but also against American targets, and in the case of the Houthis in Yemen, against international shipping. The other common thread is that they are all reacting to events in the Gaza Strip. And this is something your colleagues have been asking me all day. How will these strikes by the U.S. in Iraq, in Syria, and now in Yemen affect what's going on here in Israel and in the Gaza Strip? Well, they probably won't. But what is more likely is that what is going on in Israel and the Gaza Strip will affect what's going on in those further flung places. We're going to, each of those groups, each of those axis of resistance, Iran-backed groups, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, have made it their mission to basically distract American and Israeli forces from operations in the Gaza Strip. Now, we haven't seen America participating directly in the events in the Gaza Strip. But as far as these groups are concerned, and as far as the Iranian regime is concerned, Israel and the United States are one and the same. The U.S. is the main backer of Israel. And so for them, attacking an American target is tantamount to attacking Israel, is tantamount to protecting the Gazans in Gaza and also Palestinians in the West Bank. They see this as preventing the Israelis from expanding their operations, whereas we see them as the belligerents, or as the United States tends to see them as the belligerents in attacking Israel and the United States targets. So, this is a very, it just goes to show a really difference of worldview that we're seeing playing out here. The fact of the matter is, each and every one of these groups is going to continue to attack, or they've sworn they will continue to attack, as long as the casualty figures in the Gaza Strip continue to go up, as long as there isn't a ceasefire or a peace treaty or any sort of negotiation that could bring an end to the hostilities that we're seeing in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, and an end to the war is something the Israeli prime minister for now has categorically rejected. So we'll have to wait and see what happens on that front. Matt Bradley, live for us in Israel. Matt, I appreciate you staying up late for us, my friend. Thank you so much. Next, we're heading back to South Carolina. We're going to get some analysis with my all-star panel. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. We are continuing our coverage of the Democratic South Carolina primary, which NBC News projects President Biden won with a resounding majority. Joining me now with more, NBC News campaign embed Nnamdi Egwanu from Columbia, South Carolina. Nnamdi, it's good to have you with us. We know you have been talking to voters throughout the day. We've been hearing some of those from our other correspondents as well. But you're at a Democratic watch party. What did you hear from folks about what the deciding factor was for the way the polls went today?
Well, Eamon, you're spot on. I've been talking to voters all day, and a consistent theme I've been hearing from the voters I've talked to in places like Orangeburg, which has a pretty large black population, is that their support for President Biden at the end of the day boils down to the fact that in their eyes, he can defeat former President Trump. I also heard one voter point to, of course, Biden's time with Barack Obama, who's still a beloved figure here in South Carolina. And I found that the older voters I talked to tended to have a more pragmatic approach to the current state of politics. A consistent thing I heard over and over again was it's going to take time. It's going to take time. That Biden will deliver on what he can, but it'll just take due time, and they have to stand by and support him. But here at the First in the Nation celebration, things have been overwhelmingly positive. Even though only 30% of the vote is in, Biden right now has about 96% of the share, and that's a resounding success to the people in this room, many of whom have been on the ground for weeks now, trying to keep the campaign going and ensure turnout was where Democrats wanted it to be. What they mentioned earlier tonight was that throughout the last 3 weeks, Democratic Party officials here organized about 150 events across 32 counties. So that speaks to the sort of dedication that they had in ensuring that, South Carolina Democrats turned out and showcased their enthusiasm. I spoke to Congressman Jim Clyburn a little bit ago about his turnout prediction. He's been saying that he hopes to see about between 100 and 150,000 people, with Biden capturing about 70% of the vote. Those are low expectations, and right now it looks like Biden is on pace to hit the mark set by Congressman Clyburn.
All right, Nnamdi, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate your reporting on that. I'm joined now by Jonathan Capehart, host of MSNBC's Capehart, Fernand Amandi, MSNBC political analyst, and Democratic pollster Amisha Cross, Democratic strategist and former Obama campaign advisor. It's great to have all three of you with us. So, Jonathan, I'll start with you. The optics of South Carolina being first was extremely important. It was something that Joe Biden personally called for, as well as Jim Clyburn, as well as other members of the Democratic leadership, including Jamie Harrison, somebody you've been in touch with. Excuse me. What does it say? Thank you. What does it say that this state finally went first, and the message that it delivered tonight by going first?
Well, a lot of people think that South Carolina is going first because this was a reward from President Biden to the state for what it did for his campaign in 2020, and that was give him a win and give him a decisive win in a state that actually looks more like the nation than Iowa or New Hampshire. And that is really the key to why South Carolina is the first primary in the Democratic primary race, because the Democratic electorate looks more like the Democratic Party than it does in Iowa and New Hampshire. And the Democratic electorate in South Carolina looks more like the nation than it does in Iowa and New Hampshire. And so by South Carolina being the first primary, it really allows for the president to come roaring out of the gate and showing just how much support he has. And I think the key thing that Reverend Al Sharpton told you in the last hour is that President Biden and Vice President Harris did not take South Carolina for granted. Leading into this primary. They visited that state multiple times throughout their time in the White House, and particularly in the last week, and going out there and asking people for their votes, not taking those votes for granted and just thinking, oh, well, you're just going to show up. No. They did what they were supposed to do and go back to those voters and make the case for why they should come out. And if these numbers hold up, it looks like their message worked.
Yeah, and I was going to say, we heard from Michael Tyler, the director of communications for the campaign, who reiterated that, saying they're not taking any vote for granted. And we saw that, Amisha, in 2020, South Carolina was hugely significant state for Joe Biden. It really was the one that turned it around after Iowa and New Hampshire and revived his campaign. And that's in part thanks to Jim Clyburn, Congressman Jim Clyburn, who cemented Biden's status as the favorite among black voters and helping him win the South Carolina primary. How do you think this primary win will shape how black voters in South Carolina and the rest of the country view Biden's campaign, if at all?
It sends a resounding message. We've heard time and time again and seen polls and listened to podcasts where the question is whether or not the black vote is going to show up, particularly looking at some waning interest pointing to black men desiring other options. And what we've seen time and again is that those polls have been proven to be false. It will prove to be false in this coming election as well. What black voters want is for their policies, the policies that they stand for, to actually be upheld. We've seen that in President Biden. We've seen it in that administration. We've seen it in housing. We've seen it in the infrastructure development plans. We've seen it in job creation. We've seen it in an economy that is built to work for all, not a privileged few. We've seen it in his push to alleviate student loan debt. We've seen it time and time again. And I think that those things matter very much to black voters, and they can rise above the muck. We know what disinformation campaigns look like. We also know the threats that will be posed by a Trump administration if he's to become president again.
Fernand, we know that in New Hampshire's Republican primary last month, you had some left-leaning independent voters cast ballots for Nikki Haley to support her effort to defeat Trump. Based on what you saw today, do you think the Biden campaign has success in stopping that trend?
Oh, my gosh. If you're the Biden campaign, you want Marianne Williamson and the other candidate, Dean Phillips, to stay in the race as long as possible. If you're going to run up 97 percentile wins in Democratic primary states, it's only going to speak to their effectiveness. But look, I think tonight, one of the major political questions in America has been answered, and that is, where is Joe Biden's presidential library going to be? Because it's definitely going to be in South Carolina now. It was the state that made his candidacy and presidency, and they stood for him strongly tonight. Eamon, I think it's going to be also very telling how the Trump campaigns react to this. Because, of course, with the big winner tonight being Joe Biden, I think the other big winner is Tim Scott. I think his elevation on the Trump VP stakes has moved up a little bit tonight, because all the talk out there was that President Biden was wavering with black voters, that the black support in the Democratic primary was going to be a problem. The opposite of that happened now. So I think Tim Scott's probably going to Trump saying, hey, look at me, because I can maybe help you in a way that you won't have if I'm not on that ticket.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the other surprising headlines, according to Steve Kornacki, is the way he broke it down, was the big turnout among white voters in South Carolina for Joe Biden. I think that was a headline that perhaps some of us were not expecting to see so pronounced this early on in the evening. Amisha Cross, Fernand Amande, and the Sunday Show's Jonathan Capehart, thank you to the three of you. Greatly appreciate it, as always. Up next, we're going to get some more analysis on today's other big story, a new round of airstrikes from the U.S., this time in Yemen. Stay with us. The United States and the United Kingdom launched a new series of strikes today targeting the Houthis in Yemen, hitting at least 36 targets in at least 13 locations in that country. This comes after yesterday's retaliatory strikes by the U.S. on more than 85 targets at 7 Iranian-backed militant facilities inside Iraq and Syria. Joining me now is Dan DeLuce, NBC News national security reporter from Washington, D.C. Dan, it's good to have you with us. So tell us a little bit more about why these targets were selected, if we know why, and why the administration is saying what we saw today in Yemen is not related to what played out yesterday in Syria and Iraq.
Well, let's take the second part of that question first, Eamon, because it can be confusing. But in the end, they are all related. The bottom line here is, right, there's a thread that goes through all this, which is Iran is behind all these proxy groups, whether it's militias in Iraq that are held responsible for that attack that killed those U.S. troops last Sunday, or the Houthi forces in Yemen that have managed to disrupt global shipping, commercial shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Now, the U.S. says they're different or separate because the strikes yesterday were aimed at the militia groups that are deemed responsible for that lethal attack last Sunday in Jordan against American troops. These attacks today with the U.K. in Yemen are supposed to try to stop those Houthi drone and missile attacks that have been going on now for months, where they're hitting commercial ships or coming close to hitting commercial cargo ships, to the point where major shipping companies, some of them now, are diverting their vessels from the whole area, creating ripples in the global economy. So that's the distinction there. In terms of the targets, what they were trying to do today, and of course Courtney Kube is on that USS Eisenhower aircraft carrier, witnessing these F-18s taking off. They're trying to get at the Houthis' ability to hit those commercial ships. So they're going after drone launch sites, or right after the drone is launched, they intercept the drone or the missile. So that's what that was about.
All right. Dan DeLuce, thank you so much for that update. Greatly appreciate. Joining me now, Lieutenant General Steph Twitty, NBC News military analyst and former deputy commander of United States European Command, and Ben Rhodes, MSNBC political contributor and former deputy national security advisor under President Obama. General Twitty, I'll start with you, and I'll get your initial response to this latest round of attacks, and what kind of impact, if any, do you think this attack will have on the kinetic dynamics in the region, both among the Iraqi militias and the Houthis?
Yeah, I think what we'll have to do is wait on the battle damage assessments that will come out of both of these attacks. The attacks that occurred yesterday, which were in direct response to our troops being killed in Iraq, and then the separate attacks, although I agree, common threat in response to the Houthis interfering with international trade and also interfering with freedom of navigation. And so what I think is going to happen in all of this play here is, as we continue to move down these ladders, of course, We cannot afford to have a direct conflict with Iran, and Iran cannot afford to have a direct conflict with us. And so if we continue in this route, every day that goes by, with the Gaza war occurring between Israel and Hamas, we're moving one step closer to that all-out conflict. And so we must institute stability and deterrence back into play here. And hopefully these attacks that we're doing to take away capability and capacity from the Houthis, from Kataib Hezbollah, from the Quds forces will help us in that manner. I'm hoping that's the case, but we shall see.
Ben, how hard is it to establish deterrence when Iran is fighting the U.S. through its Arab proxies in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Iraq, and in Syria against America? And they're not paying a high cost, I would argue, since they are just basically losing hardware at this moment. The militias are being attacked, but at the end of the day, Iran is willing to pay that price so long as it can keep America on its back foot in the region, so to speak.
Yeah, I don't think you can completely deter groups like the Houthis that part of their ethos is that they're not deterred. You know, we've been striking Houthis and they've continued these attacks. They've weathered years of war. I mean, keep in mind, it's several years of a Saudi-led coalition bombing and attacking Houthi targets, and they've been resilient through that. So I think what the administration is trying to do is at least try to push them back, degrade their capabilities, send a message that if you continue these types of attacks on U.S. forces, we're going to attack you. But it's kind of a loop of conflict. And what concerns me, Ayman, is that this has been a steady escalation over the course of the last several months. The administration has been saying they didn't want this, but then they get drawn in. And we've seen attacks in Iraq and Syria. We've seen attacks now in Yemen. Clearly, they don't want to attack into Iran. I think the common thread is not just that Iran backs these proxies. The common thread is that this escalation has all taken place since October 7th, since the brutal Hamas terrorist attack in Israel, and since the overwhelming Israeli military operation, which has obviously caused such a catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And these groups want to be seen as at the vanguard of standing up to Israel and the United States. They want the kind of global attention that comes with them hitting the U.S. and getting in this kind of tit for tat. So we're kind of getting drawn into something where you have these arsonists across the region that kind of want the fight. And unless and until we're able to de-escalate the situation in Gaza, we are going to be in this kind of very volatile tinderbox of a situation here. And that's why I think you need some diplomacy alongside these strikes to try to end the fighting in Gaza.
So to that point, General, and Ben brings up a very important point about this escalating since October 7th. It's been almost now 5 months. The U.S. was not militarily involved in the region directly. You know, presence, it was always there, and it was taking actions and counterterrorism measures. But now the United States is operating in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria. I think a lot of Americans, for the first time, learning about Tower 22. Israel's engaged in this cross-border violence, if you will, striking between Hezbollah and Israel, and now it's also happening in Syria. The U.S. is operating in Somalia. It's hard to convince the American public that we are not going further and further into a war when we're seeing upticks in these types of attacks.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is hard to convince the American public. Of note as well, if you notice with the attacks today, we had a coalition that came along with us. And there was only one Arab nation, and that was Bahrain, as part of that coalition. And so I asked myself, where is the Arab world in this? If we're talking about global trade being interrupted, then it's not just global trade from the Western nations that's being interrupted. It's also from the Arab world. And I think that diplomacy needs to lead here, and we need to get the Arab world involved in putting Iran in check as well as the proxies in the region.
All right, Lieutenant General Steph Twitty, Ben Rhodes, gentlemen, thank you to the both of you for your time and analysis tonight. We are back with final thoughts on tonight's primary in South Carolina. That's coming up next. Back with the president's victory tonight in South Carolina. NBC News projects that Joe Biden won the first Democratic primary of the 2024 season. Fernanda Amande and Amisha Cross are both back with me. Fernanda, I want to get your final thoughts as we close out the show tonight. What lessons do you think the Biden campaign takes away from tonight and applies to either the rest of the primary calendar or the general election?
Well, I think tonight was a stress test in the sense there was never any question, Eamon, about what the outcome was going to be. Everyone knew President Biden was going to win. But to have this kind of a statement win with 97% of the vote, I think gives them the confidence that they are on the right path. It probably puts a lot of the Democratic bedwetters in the back burner a little bit, that this is not falling out of control, and allows them to really zero in and focus on this general election matchup, which is the matchup. Donald Trump versus President Biden. The economic news continues to get better. There's likely to be a very bad jury verdict against Donald Trump coming out of that case in New York, which will put him on the skids again. So I think as long as Biden stays the course, delivers those messages of accomplishments, draws the contrast, he's going to be in solid shape. Tonight was a great night for his campaign.
Amisha, same question to you. Where does the campaign go from here, both in the rest of the primary calendar as well as the inevitable matchup between Joe Biden and Donald Trump?
He messages his accomplishments. He talks about the changes that were necessary post-COVID-19. He talks about the record unemployment. He talks about the economic condition of this nation. And quite frankly, he bets on Black. What we've learned time and time again is that Black people are like the Avengers. They will come and they will save our democracy over and over again, regardless of how bad, in many cases, that democracy has mistreated us. I think that he hones in the message. He reaches out to diverse groups, and he makes sure that he elevates the very people who have saved him time and time again, and that's Black voters across this country.
Well, to Fernand's point about the library, it should be in South Carolina. I guess, are there any issues that remain a cause of concern for you, Amisha, tonight as we look into the calendar? Is there anything that the Biden administration should not take for granted and not to rest on their laurels?
Absolutely. I think that when it comes to understanding that even though our economic condition is strong, there are still people who are not necessarily feeling that at home, particularly those from diverse communities. And as the Israel war rages on, he has to be very certain and understanding of what communities of color specifically are drawing from our actions there. And watching what they are seeing is Israel being very attack worthy when it comes to being willing to level critical infrastructure and to, quite frankly, what it looks like commit war crimes against innocent Palestinians.
All right, Amisha Cross, Fernanda Amande, it's a pleasure to have both of you with us. Thank you so much for your insights and analysis tonight. Greatly appreciate it, as always. That does it for us tonight. Thank you so much for being a part of a big news of breaking news. We're back tomorrow at 7 o'clock Eastern. Have a good night. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ayman Mohideen. We're going to have more of Rachel in a moment, but we want to bring you an update on South Carolina's Democratic primary. NBC News projects President Joe Biden has won with a resounding margin, and Biden issued a statement thanking the voters of South Carolina, saying in part, quote, "In 2020, it was the voters of South Carolina who proved the pundits wrong, breathed new life into our campaign, and set us on the path to winning the presidency. Now, in 2024, the people of South Carolina have spoken again, and I have no doubt that you have set us on the path to winning the presidency again and making Donald Trump a loser again." A total of 55 delegates were up for grabs tonight, and they were all awarded proportionally based on the results to President Biden. A big concern for the Biden campaign going into today was whether voters were motivated to get to the polls for Joe Biden. Here's what voters told us.
There is some concern about enthusiasm among Democrats come November. Do you think enough Democrats are excited to vote for Joe Biden?
Probably not. I mean, clearly there are very few people here today, and I think that's an indication. Yeah. I hope it'll change between now and November.
Are you excited to vote for President Biden?
Yes, I am. I am. I think that patience is, I've been around long enough to see, that there is change with time. So younger voters might not be so aggressive to do that. But I am patient, and I've seen what can be done, so I'm excited about the future.
Earlier today, I spoke to Michael Tyler, communications director for the Biden-Harris 2024 campaign, about the president's win. Here's what he had to say about how Democrats are looking at turnout in the Palmetto State.
I'd start by comparing this to the first Republican contest in Iowa. You had about 110,000 folks turn out for the Iowa caucuses, an incredibly competitive election with multiple candidates. Here in South Carolina tonight, you'll have around 100,000 people turn out for the president because they appreciate everything that he has done over the course of his first term, and they're excited about the future, and they're geared up and understand the sense of urgency for the general election ahead. I think if you want to look at other metrics for enthusiasm, you can look at our grassroots fundraising. We had our best grassroots fundraising month in January.
All right, let's get to the big board with MSNBC national political correspondent Steve Kornacki to break down the numbers behind Biden's projected victory and what they could tell us about his overall performance. Hey, Steve.
All right, well, there was not a ton of suspense leading up to the South Carolina Democratic primary, and on that front, it delivered. There was not a ton of suspense as the results came in tonight. The call was quick for the president, Joe Biden, winning this primary, winning it overwhelmingly here. Again, the significance of South Carolina here for Biden. This is the first primary where the president actually had his name on the ballot. Remember, he ran as a write-in candidate up in New Hampshire back at the end of January. He got 2/3 of the vote there with people writing his name in. But this time, Biden's name actually on the ballot. And you can just see here, it's near unanimous. We still got some votes to come in statewide, as you can see, but we got a big chunk of the vote that comes in. And I think the most significant thing, just besides obviously the margin here, I mean, look how close to 100 Biden's number is. Neither of his opponents yet even at 2%. But just county to county, I could go through each of these, but there's really no variance. It's not like he has a weak region right now. It's not like there's a particularly strong. He's basically running around 95% or above right now in every county of the state. And one of the questions we were asking about South Carolina, one of the reasons we thought this might be an interesting test for Biden is there's been indications in some polling that Biden might have some slack with black voters. Black voters were so important in South Carolina in 2020 to delivering Biden that victory. Remember, he crushed Bernie Sanders, turned the whole Democratic race around. It's why he wants South Carolina to have such prominence in the Democratic primary process. So you're certainly seeing in counties with large black populations here. I'll give you an example right here. Bamberg County. This has one of the largest black populations in terms of percentage. It's a small county overall statewide. Biden's running at 96%. Again, Williamsburg County. This has the second highest concentration of black voters in the state. There's Biden at 98%. But we're seeing it as well. I'll go up here to Pickens County. This is where Clemson University is. This actually has the lowest share of black residents in the entire state. This was Biden's worst county in the 2020 primary in South Carolina. Just take a look at the results. He barely held off Bernie Sanders here. Remember, he crushed him statewide. He barely held him off in this county. But again, even here, Biden's running at 95% tonight. So overall, the story that seems to be told by the result tonight is Democratic primary voters. We saw it in New Hampshire, and we're seeing it especially here in South Carolina. Maybe they would have reacted differently. We'll never know. If there'd been a bigger name who'd stepped forward to challenge Biden, maybe they wouldn't have. But, Marianne Williamson stepped forward. Congressman Dean Phillips from Minnesota stepped forward, and the message that Democratic voters are delivering is they're just not interested. They're just not that interested. They're ready to go with Biden as their nominee. That's the message they're delivering here. They're ready to move on to the general election. When the candidate is getting 96.5% of the vote, I think that message comes through loud and clear here. In terms of the overall turnout, we'll see where it finally lands. It's a little bit looking like it's going to be a little bit more than 1/3 of the total from the 2020 Democratic primaries, obviously much more competitive. And the other significant thing here, just to keep in mind, somebody watching this primary tonight is Nikki Haley. In 3 weeks, South Carolina Republican primary, so important to Haley, her home state. She's relying on independents. She's relying on Democrats. The rule in South Carolina is anybody can vote in either primary, but if you vote in the Democratic primary, you cannot vote in the Republican primary as well. So the Haley campaign probably sees every vote that ends up getting cast in this primary as a potential missed opportunity for a voter. They would like to get into the Republican primary to vote against Donald Trump. So that's the other significance of this result tonight when we see what that final turnout is. But the overall headline here is just we expected Biden to win. We expected him to win extremely big, and he won extremely, extremely big tonight in South Carolina.
All right, Steve Kornacki, thanks for that. We're also watching other breaking news in the Middle East after the United States and the UK launched a new series of strikes targeting the Houthis in Yemen over the group's ongoing attacks in the Red Sea. The attacks hit at least 36 targets in at least 13 locations across Yemen. A senior Biden administration official told NBC News today that the strikes in Yemen and yesterday's attacks on more than 85 targets linked to Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria are not related. I'm Ayman Mohideen. The Rachel Maddow Show continues next.